When it comes to accessing trades, there's two ways. And so part of your trade execution routine is about looking at a trade and asking yourself, does it fall into the category of immediate access or delayed access? Now, an immediate access trade is a trade that you can clearly identify ahead of time, that you can say, I know already exactly where I'm going to get in, exactly what should happen, and exactly where the trade's going to go to. Now, you may not be at the point to take the trade on, but you know that when you reach that point, the trade is clear, you know exactly what you're going to do. So you've already got defined entry, your risk, your stop, a target. You know all of this, so the trade is immediately actionable. You know, in this example, that once you break this level, there is nothing to stop you going here. So you have a very clear breakout trade. Your stop is going to be defined as below the previous high prior to the breakout. So the only bit that is kind of uncertain is precisely how many number of ticks your stop is, but you do know exactly where your stop is going to be, at least as a reference point. The trade is immediate access. Doesn't need any more thinking, you just wait for it to get there, and bang, you take the trade on. Now, perhaps the trickier trades are what you call a delayed access trade. A delayed access trade is one where you can see the potential. You know what could happen, but currently it's not clear exactly why that would happen, how that would happen, and how exactly you're going to take the trade on. This can often come down to, and we'll talk about this in game planning, the sequence of action on the day. Take, for example, this move here. Theoretical move, break this level, run to this level. Now, if you've got a day that is clearly trending up to it, it makes a lot of sense that this is a very clear move. Now, if you're looking at a similar type break level, trade higher, and you're on a day that's exhibiting very range-bound trade, whilst the potential is there, you can see what could happen, there is no reason to believe that that is going to happen, because the sequence of action that's preceded this does not indicate that potential. Therefore, this becomes a delayed access trade. You need more information. Once you have more information, then it can become an immediate access trade. So it's about asking yourself, well, what more do I need to know here? What's going to help me in understanding this trade? Something like this, very range bound, well, what's going to change? You need to see something needs to change up here. And that's the bit that's delayed because you don't know what's going to change. You know something could, but you don't know whether it will, and you don't know what it is. Once you get that piece of information, then the trade can become immediate access. You know this bit, that's fine. But you need to be able to say, right, I've now got some information that says, yes, this can be done. And then you can go for it. So that's the difference between the two. I'll illustrate this with a trade idea in just a moment. And also the delayed access may be that you could see the potential of a trade, or you could see how you could enter a trade, but you're unclear on whether it's really got any more potential in it. This is often something that will come after a completed move. Is there really anything more in this? And that's where you need to find more information out. The market is showing you that yes, it is willing to do more. So let's go and have a look at a immediate access versus delayed access trade. And this is a trade that comes in the same market over the course of a day. Right, just very quick, as a real kind of diagram as to how to think these things out. You can have a trade idea. Now, if this is an immediate access idea, what this needs is you need a clear target and you need to be able to frame your risk. I define very clearly what your risk is on the trade. You need to understand what your edge is on the trade, and we'll cover this in game planning in a bit. What your edge is on the trade, how exactly you're going to take this trade on. If you know all of these things, bang, execute the trade. There is no reason not to. You've covered all bases, you know exactly what you're looking for, you know exactly what it's going to cost you if this goes wrong, you know how you're going to do it, execute. Now, if at any point you can't answer one of these questions, we then move back to no access or delayed access. So if you don't have a target, you can't frame your risk. If you're not sure where your stop is, you can't frame your risk. So that then brings to the question of what you need to know to access the trade. Once you can answer these questions, once you can say that yes, the market is able to keep on going, it is able to put that next leg of the move in, then you can enter the trade. If you don't get any answers to that question, if it's not clear to you where the trade is or what you need to see, even if it goes to the target that you thought it could reach, if it's not showing you why it can do it or how it can do it, there is no trade. And you can walk away from that at least comfortable with the idea that you said, right, well, I needed to see this, I didn't see any of it, I therefore cannot take the trade in the way that I wanted to. The move can happen, but just because the move happens doesn't mean that you have to have been on every move. And this way, it just makes your life a lot easier to go, right, well, I don't need to be part of that because I cannot define the trade clearly. Therefore, I can move away from this and step back. So take something like this, create your own kind of decision tree, if you will, as to what you should be doing in any situation. It's about defining whether a trade is on or not and exactly whether you're clearly defined in that trade. So let's go and have a little look at an example here. This would be an immediate access trade. You know all the information that you need here. You know what should happen when you get down to these reference points. You know how the market should play. So what we're looking at then is a move through this little block. Now this is quite a wide range block. This is a block that runs from around about 86 to 64. So pretty wide range, but it's created in the middle of the night before a reversal. Now this reversal is in the overnight trade. So pretty light volume reversal. You look, there's no volume down here on this, yet the Bund runs up a full 200 ticks. Obviously compared to a previous example, this is a much higher volatility environment. Market is moving very, very rapidly at this point in time. Now, you can look at this and you can understand where the opportunity comes, the rationale behind it. You get this late bid, which is then immediately reversed, bang. And we then get a trend day down. So the market is now trending down. Now, to start with, this is a delayed access trade. You can see the potential to sweep through this range, but unless you get a market that's actually showing you a willingness to go down, that is just merely something that it's there, you could do it, but we need context, we need rationale behind it. So we now have a trendy type day. Right, so now you've got a clear execution zone. Get into the box. You can execute in the box because this is the last point from the overnight session that can stop you, and it's a very small little range, so little execution zone. Once that breaks, you can now target the low of the previous day. So that gives you another 66 towards the downside. Clear target, clear risk on the trade. You know where your stop is. If we come back out of the box above 90, you're out of the trade. You can take this on. You know what your risk is. You know what your target is. This is immediate access. You also can see very clearly why this will happen because so far on the profile, you have got a move back down through the previous day's range, single prints through the beginning of value. So this is looking trend-like, and this is then the continuation of the trend down towards the low of the previous day. So access is clearly defined. You can take the trade on, which gives you this move. That all makes sense. Immediate access trade. All you're waiting for at this point in time is to get into the box. If you get in there, you know what's coming, you can have a go at selling it. And this is one where you're going to have to be aggressive in the sell. And also, if it rotates back up the box, you can then add passively. There's an alternative to this, that from this small sort of wedge here, you can have a preemptive passive trade, that you break the wedge and you then get the potential of a trade here. Now that's a delayed access trade. You can't define selling here at 169.05 whilst you're trading up here. You don't know precisely what's going to happen, but seeing that this is beginning to be trend-like, you can at least say, well, I know that I've got a trade in here. So there's your immediate access. That's a delayed access trade. It becomes clear as the move establishes that you establish some lows, you break the low, now you know that you've got a passive trade. That has now become immediate access and you can take the trade on. But you couldn't define that trade beforehand. You might be able to say, I can get a structure to play for that, but until you have that structure, you don't know what the structure is going to be, so you can't predefine precisely what you're going to do and precisely where your risk is. Now this may not have produced anything. This could have edged down, in which case you don't get a trade, and your only trade is the immediate access trade that you've already defined. So let's go and have a look then, after this has happened, the continuation of the move, which is a delayed access trade. Why? Well, looking here, having seen this trend down in this way, you've got a very large tail on the move down here. We have finished the move off into the previous day's low. Is there any more in this? Potentially not. So this is then a delayed access trade. You can't define exactly where else this can go at this point in time. We've also seen, looking at the volume here, a very good example of an exhaustion of move. So this is the into the box, break the box, exhaustion onto the previous day's low, bounce, and volume tails off. Right, so at that point, you could reasonably say, this might be it for the day. So you've then got to ask yourself, right, well, is the next leg a viable trade? And this is where the delayed access comes in. And you have to ask yourself questions as this move happens. So if you've got a break of low, should you really be expecting a break of low with an exhaustion and then another temp down that doesn't make the low? Should you really be expecting another leg? Arguably not. As the market stabilizes up here, it's easy to say, oh yeah, well, you just sell it. Back in the box, another leg down. But is this a trade that you really have enough information to believe in? Or is this a trade that you're looking at thinking, well, it could happen, I'll have a go at it? In which case, it's hard to clearly define your risk. Yes, you could say, well, just sell it somewhere in the box and put my stop up here. But if you're not really sure what the outcome of the trade is, where else could this go? It's not easy to define what your risk is and whether that risk is worth taking. So this is now delayed access. You know where there is potential, that if you can break the low, that's this low here, you can then go and test the more recent low, which is 67.40. That's the yearly low. So there is potential. You can see this move. But what you can't decide at this point is whether this is really a move that's actually going to happen, and this is your delayed access. So you're looking for more information. We get out of this little zone and we grind down. Does this give you enough information to believe that this is going to happen? No. Volumes have not really changed. The market is drifting lower. Okay, delta's dropping a little bit. So that doesn't give you anything. But what you can then start to look at is, well, you've got a low and another low. So you've got a trigger point and an acceleration point. If there is to be a trade here, the opportunity is going to come on the break of that trigger point, because at least then you can define your risk. You can also define that there's only one place for this to stop before reaching those yearly lows. So now you do have an immediate access. Even though this is quiet and steady to get down here, you've got a situation where you can define a clear risk on the trade. You can define a clear point where this becomes the move that you're looking for, and a clear method to enter the trade. What it does is it saves you selling up here where it's not clear, selling in the middle of nowhere, giving yourself a large stop where it's still not clear what's going to happen. But down here, it becomes clear. Down here, the information that you need is to see that the market can hold below 31. And if it can do that, the move is on. Even if the move is still somewhat slow, the move is on because there is now nothing to get in the way. That then becomes immediate access. Then you can take the trade on. So that's the difference between the two. Delayed access can become immediate access, but equally, delayed access trades may never become immediate access trades, and you don't get an opportunity. If this had drifted on down and just kept on drifting, no pullback, just tick, 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 there's no trade. There's nothing you can do with that, and that's a delayed access trade that never converts to immediate access, in which case you don't then become frustrated at missing it because you haven't missed anything. You've just seen a move do something that you'd had no way of defining how you would take the trade on. It's not a trade. So that's the way to think about execution routine. Ask yourself, and always come back to that, is it immediate or is it delayed access? Next up, economic data routine. Now, we've done a fair bit on economic data and central banks, so we're not going to dwell on this too much. More a sort of summary. One of the key things, I'll send this article over on opportunity cost, is that it's about preparation. Forego trades if you want to trade the data. If there's a trade that's available, you can go for it, but then don't trade the data because you will not have fully prepared for it. If you haven't fully prepared, a bit like the beginning of any day, if you haven't gone through your preparation routine for data, don't trade it. It's that simple. Don't get yourself into a position where you're trying to react to very quickly moving markets with information flying about that other people have fully researched, planned, and have structured what they're going to do. So make sure that you bear in mind that opportunity cost. It's something that I often talk about with trading, say, an event that's in the middle of the night. What are you foregoing to trade that? If you're going to trade the Bank of Japan in Europe, well, you've got to bear in mind that to stay up all night, realistically, you are foregoing opportunities the next day because you're not going to have the sufficient focus, mental capacity to fully trade the next day if you trade in the Bank of Japan. So that's a decision that you have to make. We looked at the idea of market structure, of knowing what an outlier number is, understanding consistent patterns. So all of that comes from the trading economic data session that we did in the macro trading week. always take it back to narrative tracking. So as long as you understand the narrative, you now understand what data is pertinent, what matters currently. You can then plan very clear scenarios. Once you've got those scenarios clearly planned for that economic data, you know whether this is going to be important, you know whether a central bank is looking for certain shifts in language, as is used in this example. And so then you know exactly what you're going to do, how you're going to execute. You understand the technical landscape. You know whether there is a binary or an interpretation trade here. You know the scope of a move. So you can tell whether you need to be jumping into what you call perhaps a smash and grab trade, or whether this is a hit and hold trade. And your narrative tells you that. It's about understanding where you are, as we talked about, in the economic cycle. You know that it's CPI is the important thing. This is the one where there are going to be multiple potential trades. There will become other periods where you see that certain economic data just becomes less important. And this will always change over time. So you have to keep track of that environmental shift, that narrative shift as to what currently is important. Is it inflation data, unemployment data? Is it earnings data? Is it something completely different? All of these things will change over time, and they're the things that you need to make sure you're tracking to be able to clearly define what you're going to do on your data and how you're going to mechanize your reaction. Have a clear structure as to what do you expect in certain situations. What should each market do? Again, this comes back to what we were talking about, assimilating information. What do you expect each market to do, and have that roughly written down? This also means that you've got a very clear sense of what the correlation should look like as well. It creates then a template to go back and check how well things did correlate to what you expected to happen. So it's all about producing a structure so you can go, okay, well, I thought this would happen. This market's now changing. Perhaps the euro doesn't react in the way that you've expected. Now you go, okay, well, that's starting to follow this market or this market, which helps then understand, right, the environment. Does this now mean that the focus is shifting more towards inflation and away from rates, for example? So that's the way that you want to be thinking about that. When it comes to your actual execution on an event, again, it's about being able to say, right, there is a danger zone here. Let's say it's payrolls, and you have a danger zone number for payrolls, for unemployment, for wages. You've got numbers that you're willing to trade. So you can very clearly go, okay, well, if we get something in this box, this box, this box, I've got to trade. So you can break these things down to know where you want to be taking trades on so that it's much easier to know what to do. Because there's a lot of information coming in. Think on payrolls, 3 key numbers, you get the headline number, the unemployment number, and the wages number, which means there are now a multitude of different potential trades. You get 5 scenarios just on the unemployment of an extreme number, a lower number, an inline danger number, a higher number, and an extreme higher number. And you get that for each of them. So you have 5 different opportunities for each different scenario. So this gives a huge number of different scenarios. You need to work out what combination makes sense for you. What combination provides a viable trade opportunity. That's the way that you've got to think about these types of things. So mechanize your response. The other thing that I always say to people is if you're not sure, and if you don't have a clearly defined idea of what should happen or what's important on this piece of data, you don't need to trade it. You can step back, let the move happen, and then you can fall back to your technical analysis and say, okay, well, the market looked like it had this on anyway, and now we're going towards it. Perhaps a delayed access trade is now becoming immediate access because the data is sending you in that direction. So that's also how you can bring your economic data in. When it comes to debriefing this as well, make sure over time that what you're starting to do is break down the data into different phases. This way, when it comes to planning the data, so again, it's cyclical. When it comes to planning the data, you know what happens on the first move. Is there actually a possibility of getting in? What's the trade that you need to be taking on? A trade that has become more prevalent over recent years has been the first minute volatility stop trade. And how do you go about trading that? That's something that you can create a very clear picture in your head as to how it trades, what it should do, and how you're going to trade it. You know, one of the best traders on news, I asked him, what's your thoughts on a higher number on CPI? He said, I don't think about the higher number, the lower number. I'm thinking now about what's the ladder going to look like on that first move? Because that movement is the bit that you need to understand. It's very easy to say, okay, if we get a higher number, the market's going to do this. But you need to know how it's going to do it, what it's going to look like in that move. And that's what I mean by this first wave. The very fast early move. What does that look like? What targets can be reached? How big is this move consistently? They're the things that you've got to ask yourself when you're going into prepping a piece of data. What's that first moment move going to look like? How are you going to react to it? How are you going to know that this is a very strong move higher? And what are you going to do about it? Do you do anything about it? Or is it a case that there may well be a situation, and you find this in lower volatility markets, where that first move is not big enough to produce a reasonable trade? That because of the size of the move, your ability to get in for the bottom portion and out at the top is diminished, meaning there's less meat in the move to trade for. You then have to move on, and you then on to second wave. So what happens on the second wave of the move? Is there a typical distance that it pulls back? How does the market stall and turn around on a pullback? Something that I've remembered for a long time, it really sort of burns into my mind, is moves on cable, on data, that it will often put in this pullback phase, but the pullback will get to where you initially expect and often overshoot that. And that's where people get put under pressure before it then comes back. So being able to visualize that and know how you're perhaps going to scale in as that pullback comes means that you're much better equipped to deal with it, rather than getting trapped with many people who go, okay, pullback, stall, buy it, second leg, they all get out, and then it reverses. If you've seen that multiple times, if you can define that second phase of the move clearly, then that's the way that you can then trade that onwards. Then there's the continuation or reversal phase. What this is the kind of bit that is going to take a little bit more time. And this again is part of every piece of data. Some pieces of data are going to exhibit these types of moves. Others that are less significant or perhaps less sensitive at that period of time are not going to have them. So it's about them recognizing where can you trade? And in terms of how you trade any bits of data, it's about going into this and saying, right, I know what I'm going to do in this phase. I know what I'm going to do in this phase. I know what I'm going to do in this phase. And you have a strategy around it. You're able to kind of move through each phase and say, right, we're now exiting phase one and we're into phase two. What do I do here? I'm into phase three, the continuation reversal phase. What do I do here? How am I going to play this? What do I need to be thinking about now? And we've looked at in the past things like, say, a smoking chimney trade. And this is part of branding up any of your economic data so that you can say, right, I know what a smoking chimney looks like. And ideally, you'll be able to draw these types of trades where you know that a smoking chimney will do something like this. And so you know that there's then a strategy around getting in here, but when you get in, having preset expectations of this, of the smoking part, that means that you're required to sit through long periods of watching the market steadily move on side. It could double the original move, but it's going to take time. So it's about being able to say, all right, I know different types of moves that you can get. The overshoot reversal move, this is one that was very prevalent in gold. You get the drop, kind of overshoots the early move, particularly on CPI, this was in gold. Then you get a reversal pattern. It doesn't have to be a delta reversal. Some of them you get a sort of little head and shoulders. Some of them you just get a bounce and block. But you're looking for a reversal, and then you're looking for the counter trend in the other direction. And it's about having these all mapped out. Different brandings of economic data. When you're going back and reviewing your data, you can then say, right, this is typical, and it has these characteristics to it. So very quickly, you can be moving into a situation, going, right, I'm expecting a smoking chimney if this happens. I'm expecting a reversal if this happens. And if you can do that, then it makes your life so much easier. It means that you go into any of these events not thinking, or not sort of going into it and then becoming reactive to what happens. That's the last thing you want. You never want to be reactive. You want to be proactive. You're reacting to information that comes in your way, but you've already got a planned out method for how you are going to react. So it's not ad hoc, it's not improvised. You know what you're going to do if this happens, you know what you're going to do if this happens. So the reaction is just choosing between the different scenarios that you already know and understand. When it comes to branding your data up, when you're doing this in any kind of debrief, what you name the trades and how you describe them, make that personal. You don't have to use my phrasing of smoking chimneys. If you have a different phrasing that makes more sense to you, that makes it more recognizable and memorable to you, go with that. It's about making it personal. It's about making it to a point where you can write, I know exactly what I mean. So that in your mind, visually, you know exactly what's coming and you know exactly what to do when that situation does arise. That's what trading economic data is all about. It's about having clear processes so that you can react, but you react with an immediate kind of solution or an immediate action following a certain reaction rather than just reacting to whatever comes through. The final thing on economic data to help progression over time. Now, this may not be useful immediately, but what I would do on every piece of economic data is get multiple markets up, just 1 minute charts of the sort of the main action, say the first hour, 2 hours after the move. You're looking for correlation. You're looking to see what markets relate to each other. Here, we've got 2, 5, 10 and 30-year US bonds. You've then got down the bottom, gold, S&P, euro and bund. So markets that you would trade over these events. And what you're looking to do here is understand how they interact with each other. This, for example, was a trade where once it became clear the direction of all bonds, all markets then moved together. And this was a point where, and if you'd watch this, and I remember watching this one, thinking, right, it's not clear because at this point you've had the 2-year bonds have flicked up and are starting to go higher, 30-year bonds have flicked up and are going lower. It's uncertain because they're then pushing and pulling on other markets. The S&P seems to want to hold up, whereas gold's been extremely choppy, bund's gone lower, nothing's clear. But then there comes a moment where everything ticks together. And as soon as you then get the 30-year come off the low, and as it does so, all the other bonds tick up at the same time, that's the moment where clarity comes through. So even if it is a case that you don't see an obvious correlation or you're not seeing really why you're looking at these things in a certain way, that's fine. Because as time goes by, these things will start to come back around. And by having this level of information, perhaps in 2 years' time, you look back and you go, okay, I can see how those correlations have shifted over time. And now you can start to understand that sort of shift in environment, shift in dynamic. Maybe it doesn't help you immediately, but always be thinking, and we'll talk about this in debriefing, always be thinking forward. This will help you at one day in the future. And so get down multiple charts together so you can see those correlations. So valuable. That's the final bit on economic data. Last thing we're going to touch on routine is the mental routine. And this is all about different techniques and different ways to what I call get in the zone. Other people call it sort of morning priming, getting yourself into the right mindset at the beginning of the day and even within the day. You know, one of the first things we talk about anchoring is about being able to reset within the day. You think it's a long day of trading, and one of the easiest things you can do is you can become fatigued as the day goes on, and you kind of just drift into just generally looking for easy answers. You know, like we talked about with technical preparation, the last thing you want to do is to fall into easy answers. So having different methods to reset is really helpful. And one of the ways to do this, and it's about working out what the problems are when you don't reset. So a good example of this was something I was talking to one of our traders about, and he sort of said, well, whenever he goes on lunch, comes back from lunch, and he's very quick to jump into a trade, and these are often losing trades. And the problem that he's facing there is he comes back, he feels that stuff has happened whilst he's not been there, because markets aren't in the same place on the screen as when he walked off to get coffee and go and get whatever lunch. And so he feels that he needs to react to that and do something about it. Now, the solution to this, and it came as quite a simple thing, was just turning the screens off. So only the execution screens, charts stay up, news stays up, but turn the other screens off. That way, whilst of course you could just turn them back on, you've created a small physical barrier. And this then allows you to reset. And by resetting, looking at your charts, looking at where the next opportunity is first, it then means that you go into looking at your ladders, looking at your execution software, without the feeling of, oh no, something's happened, I need to do something about it. And that's so valuable in just making sure that you're taking yourself back essentially to, back to your prep. Go back through your prep. And this is why it's worth writing down these hypotheses on a morning sheet that you can go back to that and throughout the day go, okay, right, well, that's changed a little bit. And it's changed because of this and this. And that information now means this. So having that little moment to reset, and it can be anything. It's not to say that it has to be that. Whatever it is, and this comes from, we'll talk about this in debriefing, this comes down to recognizing periods where you make mistakes, periods where you get sucked into easy options and easy ideas, and then trying to find some way to reset yourself. So I'm not saying this is the only thing to do, turn your screens off, but often creating a physical break is helpful. Something I've done personally in the past is after a losing trade, I've tried to create a physical right. You take your hand off the mouse and you look to a chart. And so that then creates a very clear physical process of action. And what that does for you is it means that you're not then tempted by the revenge trade of, oh, I lost, I'm straight back in. I know personally that's something that's affected me. And so with that being the case, I want to get away from that, and creating a physical step to do that, literally taking your hand off the mouse, is one of the ways to go about doing it. Of course, you don't always do it. But at least if you have that planned and that's a planned reaction, you can do it more often than not. Now, one of the other things that I think is really valuable is creating something that triggers focus. And this comes down to that kind of getting in a flow mind state. And one of the best places that I've read about this kind of thing is a book by a guy called Josh Waitzkin called The Art of Learning. Now, it looks like, but it's not one of these wishy-washy self-help books. It is process orientated, which means in order to do this, he has a process, he has a methodology to do it. And this is him explaining how he's done it when he went through a chess career and how he used skills that he had to create a trigger for focus. So how to bring that out when you need it. And one of the things that really stuck with me as a way of doing it, and this relates to anchoring, is the idea of creating association. So taking an activity where you get completely engrossed in that activity, something that when you're doing it, nothing else matters. And once you know what that is, then attach something to this. So something that you would do before it, or a piece of music that you might listen to consistently whilst doing it. Any of those things, what they do is they create immediately an attachment to that sense of complete focus. Meaning that if you then use a piece of music, an action before trading, you can generate a similar type of focus. And ideally, over time, you don't even need the anchor, the action that associates to that thing. He used the example of eating an apple before playing sport being one of the types of anchors. And the idea that after a while, you don't even need to eat an apple, you just think about it. Obviously, if you're going to go down the eating route, probably make it something healthy. As much as I'd love to eat chocolate all the time before trading, probably not best for me. And then you apply the same thing to trading. Personally, I found that music was a good thing. And I've done this in a couple of different ways. One, there was specific music if I would say down on the day and I needed to focus to recover that, which I know is not necessarily the right approach necessarily, but I found it very helpful that, if I'd taken a bit of a bad hit, to be able to go, right, now we're gonna structure our way back. We're gonna take whatever trade becomes available and take it for what the trade is, not the temptation to try and recoup everything in one. I had specific music that I would listen to, and consistently I'd listen to that music. Now, part of the anchoring there came from the fact that I'd put the music on and I recovered it. And so that then became associated with recovering the loss. And that then became a thing that I did consistently. So people would know if I was down on the day, depending upon what music I was listening to on Spotify. Equally, I've done this with bringing back, and this was something advised by one of the other traders, that on the journey to work, and this is again where Spotify is very useful actually, to go back to periods where you were doing very well, where you had a good run in trading, and look at the music you were listening to throughout that period of time. You listen to that music on the way to work, again, it creates an association back to those periods. That way, again, puts you in a good mind frame for when you get into the office. You're already kind of building that confidence up. You're ready. You know what to expect, and you know how you're going to trade because you're full of that confidence you had when you were doing particularly well. So that's something for me personally. Music was quite a big thing with that kind of thing. But other people do things in a different way. Other people will do. I know some traders will write down an intention for the day, and by associating again with certain things, you create again a desire to achieve something. And there's been studies on this kind of thing in the past. There was one where students were asked to describe different personality traits, and one group was asked to describe older people, and another group was asked to describe younger, sort of early 20s people. And after having done that, they were then each group given a maths test, not a massively taxing one with questions that you could do reasonably quickly. And it was about speed. And so what they did is basically they were asked to answer as many of these questions as possible in a time limit. Those who had written down characteristics of younger people were generally much faster than those who wrote down characteristics of older people because of the association with speed across the two different generations. So by writing down intentions, you put yourself in the mindset of wanting to achieve those things. Apparently there's a very strong connection with aiming to make money and being competitive, which is not necessarily ideal in trading because you don't want to try and become competitive if there's not an opportunity there. But by having that intention of looking for precision, looking for commitment, they're the kind of things that are going to make trades work. You need to be precise on getting into a trade. You need to commit to the idea. You need to think about things getting bigger, because that way you're going to be able to leverage a trade up when you get into it. One of the other things that I think is helpful, and people do this in different ways, and it doesn't have to be a kind of meditative thing necessarily. Some people will go that far, but visualizing the trade. And when I say visualizing it, I mean literally thinking about what it's going to look like when you have 10 lots in that little box. It says you're 10 lots long, or you're 15 lots long, or whatever it is. Being able to visualize exactly what that looks like, exactly what that little position is going to look like, and how the market's going to move around that. The more detailed you can do that, which comes from your ability to immerse yourself in what you're doing when you're trading. The more detailed you can visualize how somebody's going to trade, the much more comfortable you're going to be in that situation. Because as the market starts to trade, you've already accepted it. You've already seen that, if you will. And it's the same kind of thing with a stop. That if you visualize getting stopped out, well, it becomes acceptable and you're able to do it. And it's not to say, oh, we'll just make losing acceptable. It's to say you're going to lose in trades. That's fine. And the better you are at accepting that, and if you can visualize the trade going wrong and stopping you out, then when it does, if it does, you move on to the next trade. Because you've already accepted that, you're past that. It's not going to affect you, it's not going to influence your next trades. That's so valuable in having that visualization of not just something going right, because everyone would like to imagine every trade going right, that's great. But it's not about imagination of things, it's about visualizing from what you've seen in the past exactly what that looks like. If you can do that, then you build up a very clear picture of what a trade looks like when it is working. You're able to spot trades when they're not looking quite right, and you're much more able to then go, this doesn't look right, I'm happy to give this trade up, because you've already visualized what it should look like when it does look right. And equally, you're able to move on from a loss because you've already imagined that happening, you've already seen that happening, and you're using experience to be able to do that. And once you've done that, then it means that it's so much easier to move on with trades. You trade a trade for what it is. Also, final thing there, self-talk on trades. Don't get sucked into the trap of being overly critical or trying to debrief, talk yourself through the last trade that you did as soon as you're out of the trade. People are very critical of themselves. It's very, very easy to be hypercritical of what you've just done and pick fault in it. Your job is not to be debriefing trades middle of the day. That's for the end of the day, because at the end of the day, you've taken a step back. You're not doing any more trading for the day. And so you don't need to take any more information out of what's happened. The question to ask yourself at the end of a trade, when you get out of a trade, is not, what should I have done better? Should I put more size on? You shouldn't have got out there, and all of the rest of the things that people create that negativity with. You're not going to have positivity. I'm not going to try and claim that you need to big yourself up on a trade that's just gone horribly wrong. What you've got to ask yourself is, what information did I just gain there? And when it's information, I mean, what information about the way the market is trading and about how the markets are going to continue to move from here have you just gained? That's the information that you're looking to find out. Right. One of the times to go and have a look at that information is at midday. When I say midday, I mean the middle of your trading day. But refreshing yourself is so vital. Obviously, trading is not a physical job. Certainly not anymore. You don't trade in any pits. You don't have to be on your feet, waving your hands around, doing anything. It can be a very non-physical job. And that's fine. But by not having any physical activity within your job, this creates a sort of lethargy. You can become tired, and without physically moving around and creating a bit of blood flow, you don't actually maintain the same level of focus. And because trading requires high levels of focus, detailed, precise thinking, once you become tired, it's very easy to fall into simple traps. It's very easy to forget the information that you've gained throughout the day. And in doing that, you then fall into the trap of kind of just doing whatever seems easy, whatever comes quickly to you. So make sure, and it's crucial to trading, and it's something that is overlooked because, for a lot of people, they look at it, but something could happen whilst I'm away from my desk. Yeah, that's true. But something could happen whilst you're asleep. Something could happen whilst you're on the way to work. You're only here to trade the times that you're actually trading. So don't worry, something might happen. But there's going to be many other opportunities throughout a trading career. And if you fall into the trap of thinking something might happen, you fall into the trap of being up trading 24/7 or 24/5, you're not going to be able to do it. And you're not going to be able to do it in a convicted way, because you're going to be so exhausted from trying to be there for everything that you'll actually under-trade the best opportunities. Giving yourself that break, that chance to get up, refresh, walk around a bit. It doesn't have to be long, it doesn't have to be excessive exercise, but just walking around and doing something. It resets you, it refreshes you, and it also means that when you come back and you can start top down again. It doesn't have to be in the same detail as your preparation, but you can start by going, okay, what is going on, really? Rather than the narrow focus that often forms. You can reassess situations that you've previously looked at and you've already got a plan for, but that plan may not be the best thought out plan. But you can then come back, reassess it and look at, right, well, what does this mean now? How am I going to go about trading this going forward? That's the value of doing something like this at midday. So whilst it seems somewhat soft in terms of trading, having these types of things, again, it's all about marginal gains. And that little marginal gain from you being slightly fresher than other people, slightly more switched on, slightly more aware of the bigger picture and the information that's in come since your last trade, since pre-grabbing lunch or whatever it is, means that you're so much more focused for the rest of the day. It basically splits your day into 2 separate trading days. I mean, you've got that same level of focus and hunger that you would have had at the beginning of the day. So final thing on routine. The whole point of having a routine and sections in your routine is that you're trying to create a minimum level of expectation, a minimum base standard that you can achieve day after day after day. This means that when it comes to your debrief, you can keep this focus on performance, not P&L. It also means that when you go through tough periods and markets are not trading as you might want, it's not easy, you've at least got this base level that you can fall back to. And that will help you achieve, even if it's only small amounts, it will help you keep rolling rather than falling to the trap of when times get tough that you become negative, you drop your process, you drop your methodology, and this then prevents you from getting out of a tough run. So by having this clear and having routines for how you do things, you can make sure that you're always on top of these types of things. The other thing that it does is it makes debriefing easy, because it means that you can go back to your plan. You can go back to what you thought and how you were going to do things, and you can ask yourself, well, why didn't it work? Why did it work? What little extra bits of information can you add on? Marginal gains. That's what it's all about. You start with something and you add to it and add to it and add to it. It's incremental growth. You're not going to have the whole package sorted at the beginning. You're not going to know exactly what it is you do well straight away. This comes through time, but by having a structured routine, you can at least then start to work out what bits of that you are doing well and what bits of it you can then start to try and improve. It means that you're always staying growth orientated. It means that you're always looking to improve. Nothing in trading is ever static. You can't look at these things and not try and evolve it over time. Your prep will evolve over time. I've given you a structure and a framework, but you're always going to be adapting that. Perhaps at some periods where it's more volatile, you might bring in a different chart for a little bit more information. Other periods you might be looking at something else, but it's roughly the same. It's having that framework. It's always about trying to grow going forward. I'll talk about sloppy trades and debriefing in coming sessions, and how you can then use your debrief to better improve your preparation, and how your preparation then better improves your debrief. So that's the way to think about it. You're creating a benchmark for yourself, you're creating a minimum standard, and this is what you've got to do every day just to be able to trade. By doing that, you're putting yourself in the right position, the right rhythm is maintained over time so that you continue to perform at your best. That's the value of routine. We're going to look at game planning and debriefing over the next few sessions, so I'll see you on them.